Welcome to the Successful Nonprofits Podcast. I'm your host, Dolph Goldenberg. Listeners, today we have an incredible conversation with Jeannie Sager, and we're going to be speaking with Jeannie about the role of gender in philanthropy. This is such an important topic right now, and I am incredibly grateful that Jeannie is going to be coming on to have this conversation with us. Before I introduce Jeannie, let me just say that fall is right around the corner. I know we're in the dog days of summer right now, but fall is right around the corner. And one of the things that often happens in the fall is organizations start to work on their budgeting if they've got a fiscal year that mirrors the calendar year, and boards and chief executives start to scratch their heads and say, maybe we should be thinking about strategic planning. So if you're thinking about strategic planning next year or even this fall, give me a call. I am happy to have that conversation with you. You can always go to successfulnonprofits.com to reach out to me. And let me also say I'm a pretty easy person to find contact information for me just by Googling it. Now, I'm so excited to be able to introduce Jeannie Sager to you. And let me share with you how I ended up meeting Jeannie. So I finished reading the book Philanthropy Revolution by Lisa Greer. Such a great book. I really recommend, if you've not read it, that you get a copy and you read it. But so I recently finished reading that book. And after I was done, I was talking to Lexi and I was like, Lexi, oh my gosh, we've got to find someone who can come on and speak knowledgeably from a data perspective and a human story perspective about women and philanthropy. And so this will probably not surprise you because we turn down the vast majority of publicists that approach us. We scoured the country for an expert. And you know what? That's exactly what we found. So let me share with you just a little bit about Jeannie. She has experience in the nonprofit sector, the for-profit sector, the government sector, and she is currently the director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute at Indiana University. And so you probably are familiar with Indiana University because they were on the forefront decades ago of turning fundraising into an academic endeavor as well. They were some of the first ones who said, okay, there's a lot of anecdotes about how to fundraise. Let's get some data. Let's do research on this and let's teach people how to do it. And so that's what Jeannie is now doing as director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute. And part of what I love, because again, we research guests pretty thoroughly before we invite them on. And part of what I love is that she is doing such a tremendous job of translating research to practice. And listeners, I think you know that I really value when we can take that research and take that data and say, this is how it's going to impact those of us that are doing the work in the sector. So Jeannie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Dolph. I'm so thrilled to be here with all of you and your listeners today.
Well, thank you. And I'm grateful that you made the time. And I thought I might just start. I know when you and I spoke a bit ago, you had mentioned that part of your institute's mission is to increase giving by all. Tell me about that.
Sure. So at the Women's Philanthropy Institute, we conduct, curate, and disseminate rigorous research that we hope grows all philanthropy. We now have over 130 data points that demonstrate that gender matters in philanthropy. But the research has not quite yet changed behaviors. And while people are finally aware that gender matters, there hasn't really been a compelling reason to change behavior in our philanthropic sector, right? I mean, in 2019, we raised close to $450 billion a year, and we're rewarded for it. But we don't focus on the gap. How much more could we raise if women in particular were met as they prefer and gave more? And so it's really exciting to kind of really put this research to practice and get it into practitioners' hands, because we can adapt. Other sectors have adapted to the reality that women are making more household decisions, that they are generally the chief financial officer of their homes. Their own wealth is rising. And so it's time for adaptations to be made by fundraisers. And here's the great thing. If we adapt for women, we get all donors. But if we maintain these current platforms and approaches, we'll continue to get more men, but often we might not get the women. So this is an opportunity to really look at all the different ways that gender influences how and why and where men and women give, and raise giving by all.
When we spoke a little bit ago, you would kind of underscore that very point with a story about a fundraiser at an Ivy League institution that you had a conversation with.
Yes. So interestingly enough, we can get kind of siloed in this work, right? So I spend my day eating and breathing gender matters and philanthropy. And so it's still shocking to me that some of our evergreen work and findings, right? Women's wealth is rising, women are more likely to give, women give differently, still isn't widely known. And so I met a young fundraiser early in her career, works for an Ivy League school, and she quite frankly and candidly said, I don't know if I can raise money from women. I only have men in my portfolio. I have only raised money from men in this short time that I've been doing this work. And that to me, I was just floored. And it underscored what we've been saying, that women aren't being paid attention to. And fundraisers in particular have agency in this. You have control over who you call and what meetings you try to arrange. And so if as an organization, you're very committed to, diversity, equity, and inclusion, including who you are engaging in supporting your mission, you need to pay attention to who is in your portfolio, just like this young fundraiser did, where she just finally realized, my goodness, I don't know that I have a woman in my portfolio right now. That continues to be stunning to me.
And talk to me about why that is, that we have fundraisers, even women fundraisers, and their portfolio, it's all men.
Our industry, our work, which you and I have been engaged in for decades, was built at a time in the 1960s that really was built around white, wealthy male donors. Even just think about the language we use in fundraising in our system, right? So we talk about it's very militarized. We talk about campaigns, right? Fundraisers are called gift officers, or worse yet, development officers. What's development, right? We talk about peer-to-peer challenges. And even the metrics. The metrics are so driven by numbers and goals. So just even the language that we use to describe our work isn't female friendly. And so it's really a systems issue, right? So if we don't change, and if we're not intentional, we really like to talk a lot about being intentional and strategic and making that change in philanthropy. So even our own beloved field that we've devoted our careers to hasn't adapted, just hasn't made the adaptations yet.
It's interesting. One of the points that you made is that we need to be pursuing more diversity and more inclusion among our donors if we're truly JEDI organizations committed to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And one of the things that made me think about, and I'm hoping we can maybe talk about it a little bit, is I'd also be willing to bet that JEDIing how you're doing fundraising also probably helps you better meet your values programmatically. Because when all you're talking to are white, wealthy men, chances are some are going to be pretty woke, but some are not going to understand why you want to move programs into a specific direction.
Right, right. And as not to belabor the point, but so many of these platforms created for giving have an unconscious bias. Just like almost every system that we live under, an unconscious bias towards men that are already built into the algorithms, including the back office in terms of the databases, right? So we have all kinds of horror stories about women not being thanked appropriately. And so really engaging and understanding how women understand their generosity and demonstrate their generosity, but throughout the whole fundraising spectrum, from marketing, seeing themselves in your materials, right? Hearing their stories in your story, to all the way through to stewardship, making sure the thank you letter goes to the appropriate individual in the household who is responsible for that gift. Or even making sure you don't include the individual who was not responsible for making that, but having that conversation. And I think if our listeners walk away with anything today, make sure you have the conversation with her. Ask her, engage her, be deliberate and intentional about how you include more hers in your work.
I have an interesting story on that. I actually had coffee this week now that I'm fully vaccinated. By the way, listeners, I know this is being released in August, but we're recording this in May. And so now that I'm fully vaccinated, I'm actually able to meet colleagues and friends for coffee again. And so I met someone this week for coffee, and she's an environmental lawyer. And she shared with me a story where she made a very significant gift to a large national I don't want to say the name of the organization, so a large national environmental nonprofit. And she made the gift, she signed the check, she wrote out the card, the giving card, and it was just her name. And when the acknowledgement came back, it was to her and her husband's name was first. And it was Mr. and Mrs., husband's name, last name. And she called them up and she's like, I'm an environmental attorney. I've represented you all in court. I'm really committed to this. I'm the one that made the gift. I need you to help me understand why my name's not on here.
Right. And it's, and we just kind of default to well, that's, the database and AI, God bless it. will override things in the system for us, in terms of efficiency. But we know, having been on the front lines and done the work, we can't always rely on that. And we need to build into the systems the ways in which and make sure and ensure that our donors are being addressed and spoken to the way they want to be addressed and spoken to. And so being able to just capture that information and know and feel confident that once that information is captured, it will be shared, appropriately. So, and it takes all of us. So one of the things that I find frustrating, which I think is also, it's evolving. So I'm hopeful. Oftentimes, organizations will silo women's philanthropy. They'll be innovative and maybe create a women's giving circle, which is important because women like to give collectively, and the research shows that. So it's a really wonderful, accessible point to bring women in. But then the rest of the team says, oh, that's Sally's work. Sally, works with the task force, and Sally works with the Women's Guild. And the evolution that's happening, and I'm really grateful for this, is that now fundraising teams are really realizing that it can't be siloed, that everybody on the team needs to understand this data that is coming out and the research that says that gender matters in philanthropy, and everyone on the team needs to understand the power and potential of women as donors and need to have women in their portfolios. And so it's no longer just Sally's work and no longer just Sally's responsibility to tend to the women in the organization.
And I'll share with you, for the last many years, back when I was an executive director, I primarily worked with LGBTQ and ASO organizations. But before that, I was in more mainstream organizations as a fundraiser. And I hear you. I cannot tell you how many times people would be like, well, Dolph's the gay member on staff, so he's going to tell us everything we didn't know, and he's going to do all the outreach and fundraising to, our LGBTQ donors. And I'm always like, whoa, that's a little bit more than I asked for. I'm not prepared to represent all LGBTQ people everywhere.
And that's the point, right? That fundraising is not a one size fits all. It's very much a relationship business. But the metrics that we use and that we champion really don't recognize relationships. and haven't created, I haven't found yet, a system that really acknowledges the importance of building relationships in order to get to the ultimate gift, right?
Right. So share with me for a development shop, and a lot of our listeners are at small and medium sized nonprofits. So their development shops, if it's not just the executive director, it might be one or two other development staff members. So for a smaller development shop, how do they start to make that journey to really doing the outreach and really working to include women as donors and as philanthropists?
I mean, it really starts with kind of your own audit. So really looking at the marketing materials that you use, looking at your database to see, and your donor list. It starts with your donor list, looking at to see who is, who are the women that are on there? What are their giving patterns? Right. So so women like to give to lots of organizations. So they may be giving $100 to your organization, and that wouldn't necessarily, on all of our different tricks and tools of the trade, elevate her in your mind to becoming maybe $1,000 donor or maybe a $5,000 society donor. But you don't know that she gives $100 a year, like clockwork, to 100 other organizations in the same year, which means she has ability. And so what you want to look for there is, who is that $100 donor? Why has she been giving for 5 years in a row? Making that call, doing a little research to see, talking to other board members and other people on your development committee to say, does anybody know Jane Smith? She happens to be giving to us, for the last 5 years. I'm planning on calling her, but does anybody happen to know she gives to other organizations in town? And so they're just these hidden, because women give differently. They don't necessarily meet all of these kind of efficiency quotients that we use to try and elevate donors in other ways. So I would begin that way for smaller and medium-sized nonprofits, to go through that donor list, see who's been giving consecutively, even if it's at a lower level. And women, really, I always like to say this. First of all, the research shows that they appreciate and understand an expanded and broader definition of philanthropy. So they bring all of their resources when they think about their generosity. So before you can get to a woman's ultimate treasure, that transformational gift, you will have needed to engage her both in all the T's. So time, talent, testimony. Is she an advocate for your organization? And ties. Is she willing to use her social capital to advance your mission? And so if you find that, and that may not, in the beginning, all those four things may not translate to this a significant enough dollar level gift that you would think she is, would be a major donor. But if any of those other things are present, have the conversation. Back to my singular point. Talk to her, ask her, engage her. That is how to get to giving in a very impactful way for women, and makes the experience of giving for women so much more enjoyable and inspiring for her.
So I've got to unpack something real quick. Really, I'd like to unpack a few things that you just said, but you just said something that blew my mind. And I've been in or around fundraising for almost 30 years now. And again and again and again, and it could just be the fundraising school, and I don't mean university, I mean, just the fundraising philosophy that I came up through and the mentors that I had. But again and again, I would hear time, talent, treasure, time, talent, treasure. You just blew my mind, because I think I got 5 there. I think I heard you say time, talent, testimony, ties, and then treasure.
That's right. That is the full spectrum of how women see generosity. And I'll add a 6th T that is so important, and that is trust. So women, I don't think actually generally donors together. It's so important to be able to have trust in the organization and trust in your mission, and something that has really just blossomed and accelerated during this pandemic is this idea of trust-based philanthropy that's happening for donors and for organizations and for foundations, where they're giving more unrestricted gifts to especially frontline organizations, which is so important, because that's saying, I know that you know what you need to get this important work done. And so I'm going to support you financially, and then I'm going to get out of your way. And so not to mess up your five, but I'll add one more, and I'll say trust.
And I'll share one of the things I love about that, because whether we're talking about board members or donors, we're talking about people giving of. And yeah, when you give trust to someone, like that's, people earn it, but ultimately it's given to you. That I love that. So I love the sixth. Thank you. That's really awesome. Now, let me ask you, as we're starting to think about moving our organizations in this direction, and we're starting to look at currently who's in our donor base and who are we serving, and who is giving and where else are they giving to. If you're advising that fundraiser who's making the initial call to maybe 5 women who are donors, who the fundraiser has done some research on and thinks they may have the capacity to do a little bit more, what does that initial call feel like?
So I think, as you all, as most of your listeners probably already do, it starts with thanking, right? It starts with, and whether it's because they are a volunteer or if they made an initial gift. So it starts with stewardship, and then it starts with wanting to genuinely and authentically get to know them better. So asking the question, why? What about my organization or this organization, prompted you to make this gift? And motivations matter, because women, the research shows that women, for them, giving is based on empathy for others, whereas men, giving is often more about self-interest. And it's not that one is better than the other, and it's not that men aren't empathetic. That's not what we're saying. They just happen to. It's a matter of degree and priority. So back to this systems level unconscious bias thing, right? So men generally will give to a man or somebody in the office, or because they asked, but they have no connection to the mission organization. So for a fundraiser to find out from the get-go, what is it? What resonates about our work and our mission that prompted you to make a gift? And then you go from there, because women often will give, their giving is directly tied to their philosophical or political beliefs. And they'll talk to you about that. They're willing to share with that. And then they're willing to ask that other question about what other ways, do you support this work? What else are you kind of doing in this space? And just getting to know not only why they give to your organization, but starting to get a sense of what does their philanthropy look like in a much broader sense.
That's awesome. I want to switch gears real quick. We're not going to go to the off the map question just yet, but I do want to switch gears, because when we were doing the research, trying to find the person in the country who we should be talking to about this, and by the way, I think we did a great job, because you're amazing. So when we were doing the research at your website, we came across some incredible reports. And when I say incredible reports, they're data-driven, they're well-researched, but they're also very accessible for those of us that are not academicians and are not researchers, and often presented in infographic formats. So I kind of want to just talk about a couple of your reports, if you've got a couple of minutes for us to talk about those.
Fantastic. And thank you for amplifying our work in that way. Our work is open source and free, and available. So if you are a philanthropy nerd like me and you want to read that whole report that includes methodology, statistics, that's there. But if you just want the executive summary or the infographics and the 5 key findings and takeaways, along with, which I love when I was managing a team of fundraisers, discussion guides and questions that kind of help bring the research to life, all on the website. Go find it, use it. We want it used. We want it out there.
I love that you brought up the discussion guides too, because you're right. That is such a great team tool just to help everyone explore it together and make sure everyone's on the same page. So can we talk for just a minute about one of your most recent reports, Women Give 2021? And I think there's a subtitle, and I think that subtitle is How Households Make Giving Decisions.
Yes. So we're very excited about this particular report because it's the last time that this question was asked of the general population was in 2005. And as you can imagine, we are a different world than we were in 2005. And so one of the most interesting findings is that while 6 out of 10 couples make giving decisions jointly, when if it's a separately deciding household, more often than not, women are making those decisions. Now, I'll say that 6 out of 10 says it sounds like, okay, that's a lot. That kind of makes sense intuitively. That's kind of been my experience. This is a drop from 2005. So what's happening is that more households are making giving decisions separately. And so what does that mean to your narrative and the conversations that you're having with individuals and exploring how are households making their giving decisions? The other interesting piece of this report that your listeners might find intriguing is that it's the first time that we've looked at other ways, other decisions, household decisions that are being made, to try and kind of compare it to what does that look like against giving. So what we found is that giving decisions is closest to how households make decisions about short-term financial decisions, which gives us a sense that maybe for these particular households, giving is more transactional. So as an implication for fundraisers, how do you move out of that and move your gift conversations forward if the majority of households see giving as transactional? And so what kind of questions are you asking? Are you really engaging in conversations about values? And I'll say one other finding is that in general, 3 out of 4 couples are satisfied with their giving. And so we always like to say that robust conversations about philanthropy result in robust philanthropy.
And I'm sorry, real quick. Did you say 3 out of 4 couples are satisfied or are not satisfied?
75% are satisfied. So if you think about your own relationships and how you encourage each other. So even if households are growing in terms of separately deciding, by encouraging conversations about their individual giving, that's just going to grow their individual giving because they're going to encourage each other. So one of the resources that we included with this particular report was a couples giving plan. And so it has just a series of questions that you and your partner can go through together. It's really great to do. We found kind of over the Thanksgiving, and holiday season, anytime kind of closer to the end of the year. But it really challenges you to think about, are your values matching up with where you give? And are you thinking about your giving holistically? So not just about the checks that you write, but the time that you volunteer, the talent that you lend to the kinds of boards that you want to serve on, and even back to advocacy. So often now we are using our social media platforms to advocate for the causes and values that we include that. That is part of your philanthropy. And what's nice about that is that some years, maybe you can write bigger checks, and some years, like the pandemic that we've just gone through, maybe your household wasn't able to. But how can you shift that? How can you stay committed to the giving plan that you outlined for yourself, by using all of the other resources to help an organization or help a cause?
I'll share with you, I love the household giving worksheet, and we're actually going to end up using it in my house. And I'll also share with you, this is where I feel like I'm a really lucky person, because I like things like that. And I like things that like are experiential, but help us come together as a couple. And my husband, he's not so into that, so he's tolerant of it. But I am the person who's like, okay, we need to do this, and I'll be like, and then eventually I'll pin down a date and we'll do it. But I think it's so valuable, and it's interesting that you say that a lot of couples now give independently. And one of my questions is, and I'm about to relate this, because obviously we often think of things through our own lens, how it kind of works in our
right.
my own household.
Of course, right.
But are they coordinating, or is it just truly like you give to who you want and I'll give to who I want, and there's no coordination at all?
Well, we didn't do a qualitative assessment of this, but what I'm hearing from stories, from the field and on the front lines, is that if they are engaging in conversation, sometimes they'll help elevate each other's giving, if that makes sense. If your partner becomes very engaged with a potential project that they want to fund, you can, as a fundraiser, you can help perhaps elevate or get them to that impact gift that they want to make by bringing in their partner. And then now a household that was giving, separately, supportive of each other, now somebody's helping that one, their partner make a gift that they want to make. And we always talk about that, right? It's not about the dollar amount. It's that what is the impact that you want to make, and then we can figure out how to get there. But let's start with the impact first.
So I've got to share with you, the rule in our household is either of us can make a gift up to $1,000 without consulting. So $1,000, not a problem.
Right.
$1,001,
and that seems to be the threshold.
Yep, exactly. $1,001, we need to talk about it. And so we give separately, and we did not used to coordinate. We do now coordinate. And the reason is, one of the roles in my family is I compile, because we in terms of our taxes, we do married filing jointly. So I compile all of our tax documents and I get them all over to the accountant, and then I work with the accountant. So 1 year, 3-4 years ago, I was compiling all of our tax documents. And, this is before the individual and married deduction went up so high. So you still really tracked every last gift you made. Mm-hmm. And so I'm putting everything together, and I was like, oh, Frank gave $500 to this organization. Oh, I gave $750 to our organization. Wait a minute. This is above our threshold. We were supposed to talk about this.
It's true. And in our household, my husband doesn't know what we gave to until tax time, when I compile all the letters and then I hand it to him. But one of our research findings is this threshold. So men, there's the difference there. Men have a larger threshold in terms of a dollar amount that they're willing to give without consulting their partner than women. And so and I find that to be true in my own household. So I find it very interesting, the dollar level that Greg is willing to go into right away versus me, because I'm comfortable at that $1,000 space. Is a little bit higher, and so it's confusing, right, for fundraisers, because if men are willing to give a larger amount out of the gate, then why shouldn't we continue to focus them again out of efficiencies? But the truth of the matter is, you're missing the point in terms of, again, this household decision making. So if 6 out of 10 couples giving decisions jointly, that means a woman is part of that decision making. If another 12% in separately deciding households is women, so now we're close to 90% of giving decisions made in a household involve a woman in some way. So what are you leaving on the table if you just go for the larger dollar threshold man deciding household, which is only at around 11%, to really focusing on a couple, married, a couple or the woman. Don't leave them out. Don't leave them out. Don't chase the money.
And I also just have to say, even if you are chasing the money and you think about it, for straight couples, most of the women outlive the men, and it's the survivor who makes decisions about where the money is going to be left.
Right. And we did include LGBTQ plus couples in this report, this household giving decision report, but it makes things a little bit more complicated because we don't know who is the single decider in those. But the data is going to start to get better because the surveys are going to start to get better, and we're going to be able to include more of those nuances with regards to what a household really looks like moving forward, and that's something we're excited about.
That's incredible, Jeannie. I do not want to leave you short and not have time to ask you the off the map question, and I think I've got a good one for you. So I understand that you minored in Australian studies, but I don't hear an Australian accent at all. So I am positive there's a very good story about this.
So my bachelor's degree is actually in international relations, but I am terrible at acquiring foreign language. So when I was doing my undergraduate degree, I knew that I wanted to study abroad. And my terrible ability to learn a second language really left me to English speaking countries as possibilities. And so the college that I went to had an amazing program with the University of Sydney in Australia. And so I was able to spend a semester there and lived with an Australian family, but acquired enough credits that I just one from a minor in Australian studies, but it was this very immersive program where we learned about the flora and fauna of Australia. We learned the literature and iconic nature of the Australian story and myth, and learned about Aborigines and that history and origin. So it's one of my favorite countries. Sydney in particular is my favorite city in the world, and I still have close friends there. So even though I don't have a minor, I still have great ties there. And once this pandemic is over, hoping to bring the women's philanthropy work over there.
That's awesome. And what a great experience to have as a young adult. What a really great experience.
Yeah, it was wonderful. Very, very life transformational. I believe in study abroad.
I did not end up doing one, but I've been fortunate to be able to have traveled a lot abroad in the last 10 or 15 years. And I don't have a lot of regrets. People always say I regret what I didn't do. And one of the things that I regret is not, and I like, it would have been difficult for me to figure it out, but to not have tried to figure out how to spend a semester abroad. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeannie. I am so grateful that you came. And listeners, I need to make sure that you know how to get a hold of Jeannie and how you can find out more about the Women's Philanthropy Institute at Indiana University. Now, their URL is pretty long. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post that in our show notes at successfulnonprofits.com. And I know that's a little bit of a heavier lift for you to get that URL, listeners, but let me tell you, it is so worth your time. As you heard, there are some incredible reports there. There are worksheets. There are like discussion questions, things that you will use professionally. If you're mentoring others or working with others, you will use them with colleagues. And honestly, it's stuff you're probably going to use in your own life as well. I know, as I already mentioned, I know that I'm going to be using some of that in my own personal life. So make sure that you go and you check it out. There's a few things I want to make sure that you're thinking about when you go there. The first is download their Women Give 2021 report. It's an incredible report. Also, make sure that you are downloading their Women's and Girls Index 2020, which measures giving to women's and girls' causes. I think it's going to be a really good document for you to take a look at. And then the last piece that I want to make sure you know about is at their website, you can access a digital hub around Women Give 2020. And so that looks at the intersection of technology, gender, and giving. Once again, well worth a few minutes of your time to check it out. Jeannie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Dolph. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, listeners, if you found this conversation with Jeannie Sager useful, there are 2 other episodes I think you should check out. The first is episode 185, 6 Ways Your Nonprofit Can Be More Trans-Inclusive with Andy Mara. Because a lot of what we're talking about today is how your organization can be more inclusive, because when we include others in our journey, whether that's donors or board members or staff members or clients or community members, our organizations are stronger. And along those same lines, you might want to check out episode 167, DEI, Leading by Example, with Jermaine Guillaume. Once again, that was such a great episode on how you can be a more inclusive organization, or this new term which I recently learned and love, how you can be more of a Jedi organization, an organization committed to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Not my term. I did not make it up, but I have to tell you, it's what I'm using from now on. Lastly, listeners, this is episode 200 and something of the podcast, and this is how you will know it's a miracle I actually was able to pull off a podcast. Because only recently it was like, oh, we should use hashtags. So here's what I'm going to ask you to do. If there's something that you really want to post about us or about this episode, please make sure you use the hashtag successful nonprofits. And you can do that at any of the social media that you use. That, listeners, is our episode for this week. I hope that you have gained some insight to help your nonprofit thrive in a competitive environment. And you know, I don't love having to close the show with this, but the lawyers make me do it. I'm not an accountant nor an attorney. This is not a surprise. You can look at my LinkedIn page and see I'm not that. And neither I nor the Goldenberg Group provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Again, this should not be a surprise. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied on for tax, legal, accounting advice. And here is my final big thought for the episode. If you or your organization are in need of that type of professional consultation, please find a credentialed, competent, licensed professional in your area and have the conversation with them. And if you do find yourself in need of legal, accounting, or tax advice and you don't know who to reach out to, you can always reach out to me. And if I know someone in your area, I am happy to make the connection.